Dickinson is back with the most anticipated album of his solo career, and in all honesty, the Mandrake Project is nothing like I expected it would be. So let's take a look at the Mandrake Project, discuss its weak and strong points, and then hopefully answer the question whether the first Bruce Dickinson solo album in 19 years was even worth all that hype. Here you go. The album opens with the already familiar intro to Afterglow of Ragnarok, which of course came out as the first single to the record. Those who are not new to the channel know that I truly enjoyed this song when it first came out. I don't think that it is actually the strongest one on this album, which is a good thing. Yet it definitely features the best possible introduction to the Mandrake Project, set in this mysterious and dark mode with its enigmatic intro going into what may be one of the strongest and definitely the catchiest guitar riff on the album. Overall, Afterglow of Ragnarok may be the most modern sounding track on the record, and yet at the same time it possibly is also the most definitive of the album as a whole, as it features all of the different sides of the Mandrake Project sound Bruce Dickinson and Roy Z crafted on these 10 tracks. And here's the thing, I said that before, that I'm not really a fan of the Afterglow of Ragnarok video, and it has nothing to do with the CGI or many other of the popular complaints you can find online, but rather because there is just so much going on there that in my opinion it actually takes away from the experience of enjoying the music. And even before the album's release, I found myself being more fond of Afterglow of Ragnarok as a song when I listened to it by itself, without the distractions of the video, or while flipping the comic book which came with it and letting my imagination do the job. The most interesting thing I discovered after hearing the album several weeks ago is that although this track somewhat stands by itself on the first part of the album musically, and I'll explain what I'm talking about soon, it still opens up much better and with many more colors as a part of the Mandrake Project as a whole than it did as a single. The intro to Many Doors to Hell is literally the most surprising thing on this entire record. After the energetic yet still rather dark opening track, it comes as a warm drizzle followed by a ray of sunlight on a dark and gloomy morning. No, seriously, the direction Bruce and Roy explore on this first third of the album is something I least expected after I heard the first single a couple of months ago. Many Doors to Hell has this upbeat vibe with a sound which came out straight from the 1970s, as if Bruce took all the music he loved growing up and reimagined what it would sound like in 2024. When the sun goes down, how will the thorny crown? By the way, because of its vocal line, Many Doors to Hell, for some weird reason, actually reminds me of Stratego. You know, like a funkier and more goofy sister of that song. All things of love and beauty, lost in clouds of fiery dust. How do you read a madman's mind? Teach me the art of war. But nevertheless, the strongest point of the song is of course its very catchy chorus, combined with this 70s rock and roll guitar riff, which no matter what you do, or most importantly, no matter whether you even like this song or not, will get stuck in your head for hours to come. And that upbeat old school mood continues on the next track, Rain on the Grave, which we all have heard roughly a month ago. Here's the thing, when I first saw the video for the track, I couldn't stop thinking about how much fun Bruce seemed to be having up on that stage together with the band. It was contagious! And hearing this song among the other ones on the record, I realized that Bruce having fun is possibly the most precise definition of, if not the Mandrake Project overall, at least of the first part of the record. Rain on the Graves, being somewhat of the centerpiece of the first half of the album, is quirky, light-hearted, and yet very fresh. Partially because on this song, just like on the other one which came before it and the one which will follow, Bruce does not take himself 100% seriously. And in all fairness, it worked quite well. Overall, it looks like on the first 4 tracks, Bruce and Roy somewhat pay homage to everything they grew up on, both musically and theme-wise, making this part of the album much more radio-friendly and accessible for wider audiences. And Resurrection Man, which comes right after it, only follows in those same footsteps. First of all, I absolutely love the spaghetti western guitar intro, which rapidly develops into the main theme of the song and follows you in different variations throughout the entire track. And combined with the vintage guitar tone of Roy Z, it creates this fun yet still mysterious atmosphere, somehow evoking these childhood memories when you were still getting easily really excited about any adventurous story you read or saw on the screen. Overall, this song would have been one of my favorite ones on the record if not for the vocal line in the verse, which in my opinion should have been taken down a whole step for Bruce to better concentrate on complementing the instruments instead of reaching for unnecessary high notes. What? And hey, everyone knows how much I love Iron Maiden and how much of a Bruce Dickinson fan I am. So I'm allowed to say that, and I'm doing that in the friendliest possible manner. But I truly believe that this song would have been much stronger if Bruce would have done the same thing his favorite Ian Gillan does these days, and a lower and more comfortable registry could have also added a bit more murkiness to this track. But nevertheless, Resurrection Man, which by the way I wonder whether that title and the idea behind it has been inspired by the Ian Rankin novel of the same name, still features an exquisite bass line which works really well with the guitars and especially on the final part of the song. But then comes Fingers in the Wounds, and everything changes. On the 5th track of the album, Bruce Dickinson introduces a new, more reflective side of the Mandrake Project, leaving the light-hearted quirkiness behind him and opening the gates to a more emotional side of the record. And I'd say that on Fingers in the Wounds, Bruce, as if to contrast the previous song, opens his voice like he hasn't done before on this record, creating this absolutely majestic and enchanting feel. And I think it's pretty obvious, since Resurrection Man was not able to take that spot, Fingers in the Wounds becomes one of the 2 most worthy contenders for my personal favorite song on this album. And I truly hope that Bruce will get to play it live during the upcoming tour, as it is definitely one of those tracks which may sound much better and grandiose sung together with thousands of metal fans. Although it does look like this will actually be yet another tour which I'll be sadly missing because of Putin's ambitions and his crazy army of orcs. And thus comes the end of the first half of the album, which I'm still bound to enjoy only digitally because my record is traveling somewhere across Europe. Why, God, why? But nevertheless, thus would be a good time for us to make the first conclusions about the Mandrake Project. So let's do it. First of all, I actually rewrote my review of this album 3 times until I settled on this final version. And the reason behind it, I'll be very honest with you, was that I simply did not really like this album upon my first listen. What? And I was going to post that review, but in the process of me writing it and listening to it at the same time, I realized that the more times I listened to it, the more it started opening up for me from different angles and different sides which I didn't really notice before. So first and foremost, I think that many will agree that the Mandrake Project is in fact a grower. So I'd say that if you only gave it one spin by now, I would really encourage you to give it a bit more time to grow on you and see whether your perception of this record will change just as mine did.
Yeah, me too.
And second, and possibly the most important thing at this point of the review is, of course, its production. No, seriously, I want to thank Roy Z for reminding me how much I missed hearing Bruce Dickinson sounded like this in any of his projects. And even more, this album is clearly divided into 3 different parts, and I'll talk about this in a couple of minutes. But in my opinion, whether you like either of the songwriting on each of those parts, most would agree that the production on each of those 3 is done in probably the best possible manner to make each of those songs sound exactly like they should. And guys, since we're having a little break here, I just wanted to thank everyone who's been supporting me on Patreon lately, and for everyone who's purchased some Metal Pilgrim merch to rock out at your next Bruce Dickinson or Iron Maiden or Judas Priest, whatever it is, concert you're going to. Guys, just know that this means the world to me, and I'm really, really thankful to each and every one of you. But alright, the break is over. Let's continue.
Here is the cell of a man.
The second part of the album opens with the most anticipated song on the Mandrake Project, a rewritten or reimagined version of the song we all know as Iron Maiden's If Eternity Should Fail, yet which of course originally was written for this album many years ago. This time resurfacing under a decisive name, Eternity Has Failed. And I'll be honest with you, this is the track which kind of puzzles me the most on this album. I'm kind of torn in between the 2 different feelings that I have. If Eternity Should Fail is actually one of my favorite tracks on the Book of Souls. So I was really excited to finally get to hear a proper demo version, which Steve Harris apparently loved so much that he convinced Bruce Dickinson to include it on the Iron Maiden album. And when I also realized that a reimagined version of that track will also make it on the Mandrake Project, well, my excitement was simply through the roof. The thing is that, and once again, this is just me talking here, but I was most excited to see how it may sound completely differently from the versions we knew before the release of this album. For some reason, and not through the fault of Bruce Dickinson or Roy Z or anybody else, it was most likely just my imagination telling me about it, but I thought that this would be a completely new song which would use the elements of what could have been If Eternity Should Fail. But this of course is not what we got. We instead got a polished version of If Eternity Should Fail, which, when first hearing it, I was actually rather disappointed about. So yeah, it bothered me back then, and I guess still kind of bothered me somewhere in the back of my head since I'm still talking about it, but in all fairness, this version of the song is pretty awesome. The guitar solo works incredibly well, and the placement of synths is done in exactly the right manner, which complements the overall sound and mood of the song, possibly even better so than the original Iron Maiden version.
Yeah, unbelievable.
So yeah, in all fairness, this version is pretty great, and I really wish I didn't think about it being a completely new track back in the day, so I can finally go past it and not think about this as a wasted opportunity and truly appreciate this incredible version of one of my personal favorite new Iron Maiden tracks. Mistress of Mercy gives out this slight freak vibe. No, let me rephrase it. Mistress of Mercy gives out this very strong freak vibe. Overall, this song is a classic high-speed heavy metal banger, which in all fairness could easily have been placed on pretty much any of Bruce Dickinson's solo albums, and kinda captures this feel and texture hard rock and heavy metal were pursuing in the late 90s, early 2000s. Now, Bruce Dickinson actually mentioned that around 80% of the Mandrake Project was actually written around 19 to 20 years ago. And I guess given its guitar riff and the solo, we could assume that Mistress of Mercy is actually one of those songs that Bruce Dickinson wrote around the time he released Tyranny of Souls. But overall, it's a fun track, which definitely contains the highest energy level of the entire Mandrake project, and serves the function of somewhat of a climax of this album, for it is after Mistress of Mercy that the mood of the Mandrake project changes once again, as Bruce and Royce go into the most melancholic part of this album. Now, I mentioned before that the album is clearly divided into 3 different parts. The first one features all those light-hearted, old-school rock and roll tracks on which Bruce Dickinson is simply having a lot of fun. The next 3 songs, Fingers in the Wood, Eternity Has Failed, and Mistress of Mercy, are possibly the closest we get to this classic Bruce Dickinson / Iron Maiden sound we all know Bruce for. And therefore, I assume if you are a die-hard Bruce Dickinson fan, it is actually one of those 3 songs which would be your personal favorite one on the Mandrake project. And please do let us know in the comments whether it is so and which is your favorite track on this album.
Write that down, write that down!
But then comes the 3rd part of the Mandrake project, on which Bruce Dickinson and Royce slow down a notch, decrease their BPM, and do something which somewhat goes against the grain of this modern music production by releasing 3 songs, each of which could be categorized as a ballad, right towards the end of this album. Face in the Mirror is this classic 1990s power ballad.
I can read between the lines.
And while I do know that it may grow on me as the time goes on, but the truth is that as of right now, for me personally, this is the weakest song on the Mandrake project. And no, don't get me wrong, it's not really a bad song per se, and I would most likely be absolutely okay with it being released by any other band on the planet, but maybe because I am an Iron Maiden fan and because I am a Bruce Dickinson fan, I feel like it has way too much repetition for a Bruce Dickinson song, and overall does not really add much weight musically to this album as a whole.
Look at your face, look at your face, look at your face.
And so I was actually rather happy that this statement is something I cannot really say about the following track, Shadow of the Gods.
And so we lay under the moon.
On Shadow of the Gods, Bruce Dickinson does something we all love him for and showcases the best of his vocal abilities. Overall, it might be one of the most atmospheric songs on the record, and I absolutely love its touchy intro and the way it has been built up to its culmination in a very old school way we all love. But then in the second part of the song, Bruce Dickinson and Royce break the rules and jump into a much heavier part of the song, which kind of dives deep into this alternative 1990s metal sound, you know, with Royce even using a similar guitar tone to that of the bands like Korn, while still being true to this classic heavy metal sound we all know and love Bruce Dickinson for. The definite cherry on top of the cake of this track is of course the exquisite solo done by Royce, which in addition to being one of the most emotional ones on the record is possibly simply one of the best ones and the most memorable ones on the Mandrake project overall. The closing track of the album is Sonata, Immortal, Beloved, which is not only the longest song on the Mandrake project, but is also the track on which Bruce Dickinson showcases possibly one of the most controlled and powerful vocal performances in a very long time.
Save me now, save me now.
Overall, I feel like this song kind of serves pretty similar purpose as Innamorata does on Metallica's latest studio album 72 Seasons. And although I guess it is kind of important for Bruce Dickinson's storytelling on the Mandrake project, I feel like it is one of those tracks which most fans would be coming back to mostly as a part of this album rather than listening to it on its own as a single. Some people say that the Mandrake Project is an absolute masterpiece and the best work Bruce Dickinson has ever done in his career. A statement with which I, in all honesty, cannot really agree. And not really because the Mandrake Project is a bad record, no, not at all. It's better than 99% of the music being released these days. But simply because talking about the best Bruce Dickinson work, even if we only take into account his solo career, you still have to compare it to such masterpieces as Chemical Wedding, for example. And you know me guys, I really don't like the reviews which only concentrate on the negatives of any given work, because the truth is that art is always very subjective, and therefore you always have this temptation of going down the big hole of selecting only the points which you consider to be weak, and which, let's be honest here, is rather popular on this platform, given it actually does give way more views than a positive review of pretty much anything.
Yes, that's true.
But the thing that I'm rather happy about is that, with the bare exception of If Eternity Should Fail, I tried to come to this album without much expectation. And now keep in mind that, as I said, upon my first listen, I didn't really like it as much. But as the time went by, and with me giving it more spins than just one, I realized that Mandrake Project is not really straight into your face kind of heavy metal that you like right away, but it rather is a grower for that group of fans who are willing to dig deeper and look beneath the surface, which I do understand that there might actually be not that many of. And this is absolutely okay.
It's just rain.
And my honest opinion about the Mandrake Project is that its biggest problem is the whole fact that it took Bruce Dickinson 19 years to release. For if it would have been released a couple of years after 2005, most fans would not unnecessarily overhype themselves about this album. As let's be honest here, some did that to the point that I don't believe that anything Bruce Dickinson could have released would be good enough for them. But at the same time, if you come to it with an open mind and see it as a work of entertainment, then I believe that pretty much any Bruce Dickinson fan can find something they will absolutely love about the Mandrake Project. And I honestly simply cannot wait to hear how some of these songs will be performed live on this future tour. But let us know what you guys think in the comments. Thank you so much for watching this video, and we will prevail. Slava Ukraini!